Boldwood presents Take Me Home, written by Beth Moran and read by Rosalind Steele. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Chapter 1. I'm no stranger to tears. In my line of work, they're unavoidable. Big, fat, honking sobs soaked up with mounds of tissues, a frustrated swipe at grief spilling over reddened eyelids. The hardest to bear are the silent streams, unnoticed by the person weeping, as if the pain is so deep, so all-encompassing. It is merely who they are now. They don't just cry, of course. I've encountered simmering bitterness, rampant rage, fear twisted up with anxiety, the fog of lingering shock, heart-wrenching loneliness. So why would I put myself through this, day after day? Why choose to spend my life submerged in the kaleidoscope of strangers' sorrows? Because I know that behind the tears, curses, and questions is love. And I, too, have navigated the river of loss. Surviving its swirling, murky depths was hard enough. Everything else that accompanied it, the house, the paperwork, the practicalities, became a burden so heavy that without help, I would have surely drowned. So here I was, walking with Alice Dumble's family through the aftermath of her death, providing hugs, hot drinks, and a listening ear as we packed up 8 decades of accumulated clutter. 3 weeks of tears, stories, and sharing this most precious, intimate of tasks. Yet after all that, I still couldn't quite summon up an appropriate response to a 60-something woman peeling off her top to reveal her 84-year-old mother's face grinning at me from her crepey chest. A woman of few words at the best of times, I stuttered, "Wow, Denise, that really expresses your devotion," before mercifully being interrupted. "Oh, for goodness sake, Mum!" Denise's son, Scott, held a hand in front of his eyes, causing one of the mugs of tea he was carrying to slop onto the beige carpet. "Seeing you half naked is bad enough. If I have to see that tattoo of Gran one more time, I'll be traumatised for life." "Oh, stop being such a drama," Denise said, fondly patting the top of her mum's head. "I've got a bra on." Nevertheless, I took a mug from Scott with a nod of thanks. "If we're hoping to get everything tied up today, we'd best get on with it." Alice Dumble had passed away after a long illness, so, in theory, there'd been plenty of opportunities to sort things out, or at least find out her bank details. However, her family had grown so used to the doctor telling them Alice didn't have long, they'd stopped taking it seriously. Consequently, by the time they contacted me, a week after the funeral, Alice's home, her affairs, and her family were a complete mess. The 4 children, 9 grandchildren, and assorted partners began arguing as soon as the eldest daughter claimed the wedding ring, and were still squabbling yesterday afternoon about a chipped vase. I'd had my work cut out to help the Dumble family deal with the varied tasks accompanying their mourning. This included sifting through mountains of stuff, readying the house to be sold, wading through bank accounts, credit, store and discount cards, and dealing with so many random online subscriptions, I was surprised she had any savings left. In 8 years of running my business, providing a house clearance and administrative support service to people following bereavement, this project had required more diplomacy, tissues, and chocolate biscuits than any other. I was itching to sign off the final few documents before leaving the Dumbles to scrap over the house sale. More to the point, I wanted to finish up before Kenneth, another sibling, arrived. He was still questioning how little I'd sold the television for and trying to insist I forfeited the 10% of profit that was part of our contract. Depending upon what my various clients could afford, I'd either agree commission on any item sold, a fixed fee, daily rate, or a combination of all three. For the Dumbles, I'd be lucky to cover the cost of biscuits. Once Denise had pulled her top back on, we sat on the sagging sofa and went through a printed summary, including all the completed admin, the allocation of various items in line with Alice's will, and the bits and bobs I'd managed to sell or otherwise redistribute. Denise and Scott both signed on the dotted lines, and after one last hug, I opened the front door to find Kenneth standing on the other side. "Oh, Sophie, I'm glad I caught you," he said, eyes bugging beneath a thick white. "Hi, yes, I'm actually all done here. Denise has the completed folder." I offered a quick smile and made to move past, but he wasn't budging. "If you've any queries, you can email me." Once I'm a good 100 or so miles away, that is. "Oh, no, I'm sure everything's in order." Kenneth's voice caught, causing me to look at him properly. His eyes were brimming with tears. "I just wanted to say thank you, and to give you these. You've got us through 3 nightmare weeks with no bloodshed, and believe me, that's a Dumble first." He whipped his hand from behind his back, brandishing a bunch of flowers. I kept my eyes on his face, managing to smile and mumble my thanks as I gingerly took hold of the stems. Yep. My finger pressed against a thorn, and I caught the waft of familiar scent even as I lifted my chin and forced my breathing to shallow. He'd brought me roses. Nausea surging in my stomach, I garbled another goodbye, resisting the urge to run as I rounded the end of the driveway and hurried down the street before dumping the flowers on a random doorstep. It wasn't personal. If they'd have been lilies, carnations, or any other flower, I'd have kept them. But roses, those my mangled heart could not handle. It was a 20-minute walk through crisp February sunshine to the campsite that for the past 3 weeks had been home. I usually parked my motorhome much nearer to the house I was clearing, where possible, on the driveway. For larger properties, I tended to be offered a spare room, which I would accept depending upon the weather, how comfortable I felt with the family, and whether Muffin, my dog, was also welcome. After one conference call with the Dumbles, I'd booked into a local campsite. The added bonus being electric hookup, a walk home at the end of each day to clear my head, and no chance of a Dumble hammering on the motorhome door once I'd clocked off. The time of year also meant that I'd practically got the campsite to myself, which was precisely how I liked it. The second I stepped up into the motorhome, Muffin scrambled to her feet, planting her front paws on my waist, her whole body wagging with joy. My heart gave a bittersweet squeeze as I rubbed her silky ears in return. I had tried my utmost not to fall too hard for this animal. While helping 2 sons sort through their father's bric-a-brac shop 18 months ago, I'd found myself with a knee-high chocolate fluff ball for a shadow. Muffin had been grieving her owner, and she'd chosen me as the replacement. It had become increasingly impossible to resist the hope in those soft brown eyes. So I'd got myself a housemate. About 10 minutes into the first night, she'd scrambled over the makeshift barrier I'd erected around her cushioned bed, then burrowed her way under my duvet and into my heart. I didn't know how old she was. Other people might not worry about this kind of thing, but with my past, in my job, it was hard to stop every snuggle, every fun-filled walk being tinged with the certainty that one day it would come to an end. After reassuring my dog that, despite having left her alone for a whole 3 hours, I still loved her, I shut down the morbid thoughts stirred up by the scent of roses and settled down on the sofa. I'd time for lunch, a chapter or two of a book, and a skim through my emails before readying everything for our next journey. The strain of the past few weeks started to ebb as I heated some soup and reminded Muffin that we were about to set off on a new adventure. The only thing I needed to decide now was which adventure that was going to be. Once we were safely tootling up the near-empty M1, Muffin strapped into the passenger seat, I called Ezra, using hands-free. "Sophie, we're just back from school, hang on." I waited for a few seconds until his gaggle of children burst onto the line. "Hello, Auntie Sophie," they called, the two girls overlapping each other, so it was hard to distinguish between them, while 13-year-old Ishmael sounded more like his father than his younger sisters. "Are you coming home?" Aaliyah, who was 9, asked. While I rarely stayed longer than a few days at their farmhouse, and only 2 or 3 times a year, it served as my official address when I needed one, and was therefore, technically, my home. "Not just yet. I'll be back for Easter, though. Only a few weeks to go." I chatted for another minute or two before Ezra announced that there were snacks waiting in the kitchen, allowing us to talk in peace. "You survived the feuding family, then?" he asked. "You aren't calling from A&E?" I spent a few minutes filling him in on the past weeks. Ezra was a silent partner in the business, the only person on earth, apart from his wife Naomi, who I trusted. His mother had been my parents' solicitor since before I was born, and he'd taken over the role when I was a teenager. He'd been there when my world crumbled into ashes, given me a safe haven where I could slowly piece myself back together and, as an added bonus, taught me everything I knew about inheritance law. I wasn't Auntie Sophie by blood, but having changed dozens of nappies, spent endless hours cuddling babies in the rocking chair while we both cried, and witnessed their eldest daughter, Jojo's, first steps, I was happy to accept the title. I'd been living with Ezra when the idea from my business began. A friend asked for advice after her mum died, which ended up with me staying for a couple of weeks while we sorted everything out. She then passed my number to a colleague who'd lost his wife. His sister happened to work in a retirement village, and so it went on. Why did they ask me, a 25-year-old ex-floristry apprentice? Because I'd learned far too many unwelcome, yet horribly necessary lessons about how to keep on living, carry on breathing, and slog through the mountains of debris left behind when everyone you love the most has gone. "So, where next?" Ezra asked, once he'd also filled me in on the latest goings-on at the farmhouse. "That's partly why I was calling." "OK, but if this is going to require a long discussion, we might be better off waiting until this evening. I need to clear up the snack time carnage before Naomi gets home. If I don't up my game, she's going to make me go back to working full-time." "No, it won't take long. I've only got 2 options. A woman in Sheffield whose dad died suddenly. There's ex-step-siblings circling and some complicated and not necessarily legal business ties with 2 other countries. Plus, the woman is severely allergic to dogs, so I'd be in the motorhome, and there's snow forecast for next week." If that's genuinely an option, I can't wait to hear the second. Option 2 is a place called Riverbend on the edge of Sherwood Forest. It's an Edwardian country house with a guest suite, including the added luxury of a bath, central heating and a log fire. The client, Hattie Langford, has offered a daily rate that will set me up for the rest of the year. Meals and other expenses. She's even got a dog called Flapjack, who would apparently love to have Muffin to stay. I don't understand the dilemma here. I know you want to help people wherever you can, but this is also your life and your livelihood. You can't risk getting embroiled with something illegal. He paused to tell the kids to pick up their coats off the floor. You haven't mentioned who's died at the fancy hall? Presumably this is the issue. A sign up ahead informed me that the next turning was for Sherwood Forest. I had half a mile to decide. Well, that's the thing. There isn't anyone. I don't follow. Hattie Langford owns the whole lot. Why does a 55-year-old woman want help clearing a house she's still living in and to tie up all her affairs when she's very much alive? Well, I guess there's only one way to find out, isn't there? By moving in? That could be riskier than the first option. A grand old house with miles of countryside for Muffin to explore, no troublesome family to deal with. Sophie, these past few clients have really taken their toll. I can hear how tired you are. Why not choose the easier, nicer option for once? 10 seconds later, we were heading off the motorway and into the forest. The nearest village to Riverbend was Middlebeck, which appeared to consist of not much more than a central green surrounded by a few shops, a primary school, and tiny church. I pulled over in the one spot that would comfortably accommodate the van and called Hattie Langford to arrange an introductory meeting. If I picked up any bad vibes, or she turned out to be a brazen weirdo, I could always back out before signing anything. "How soon can you get here?" she asked, with a warm voice that was instinctively reassuring. "Are you anywhere close by?" "I'm not far at all. I could be there first thing in the morning." "Well, if you're not far, how about supper tonight?" "Oh." After a moment's hesitation, I decided I might as well get it over with rather than potentially wasting a night here. "Okay, yes, thank you, that would be lovely." "As you enter Middlebeck, go straight past the pub, 100 metres or so, and the turn-off is on the right. You won't miss it. Once you've reached Riverbend, you can park in front of the main house, then follow the signs to the studio and let yourself in." "Right, thank you." "Thank you. I'm very much looking forward to meeting you." It was just after 5. At the grander places I'd visited over the past, I'd learnt that supper would not be served any time soon. Deciding it was best to give Harriet an hour to prepare for my arrival, I poured a mug of tea from the flask I'd made earlier, then tipped some kibble into Muffin's bowl after a firm nose nudge reminded me that her supper was due 10 minutes ago. I sent an apologetic reply to the potential Sheffield client, with links to some websites they might find useful, then killed half an hour looking up Sherwood Forest dog walks before swapping my jeans and jumper for a navy trouser suit and cream blouse. Stuffing my dark blonde hair into a bun, I added a swipe of mascara, slipped into brown ankle boots, and was about as ready for Riverbend as I was going to get. Chapter 2. I chugged past the pub, craning my neck until I spotted the turn-off Harriet had mentioned. It was a one-track lane tucked between thick hedgerows that I probably would have missed in the dark if it hadn't been for a wooden sign lit up by solar lamps, pointing to Riverbend in turquoise script styled to look like a river. My headlights caught glimpses of trees lining the road as we bounced over potholes and puddles, but it had started raining a few minutes earlier, so I couldn't make out what lay beyond them. Just as I'd convinced myself I must have missed another sign, a brick wall loomed up ahead, the lane continuing through a high archway. concentrating on not scraping the sides of the motorhome on the wall as we crept through. When I did look up again, the house standing in front of me took my breath away. Wowzers, Muffin. Take a look at our new home. I stopped for a moment, taking in the Juliet balcony above curved steps leading up to a broad front door. It was more of a hall than a house, but the squat, almost square shape and the fairy lights entwined in the clematis clambering up the wall made it appear more homely than grand. An enticing glow shone through the rain from several floor-to-ceiling windows, and my stomach gave a soft growl at the thought of the supper we might find within. I could just about make out another signpost to one side. Parking up on the large semicircle of gravel in front of the house, I hopped out to take a closer look. More fairy lights wrapped around the hand-painted arrows pointing to the boathouse, kitchen garden, and the studio. I released Muffin from her seatbelt, clicked on her lead, and we dashed through the downpour, around the corner to where another sign for the studio pointed up an external flight of wooden stairs with patterned pots of greenery perching on every step. I guess this is where we'll be, I said, as we climbed towards the turquoise door, lit up by a carriage lamp fixed onto the wall above it. Harriet had said to let ourselves in, but if this door led straight into the guest suite, then I wasn't sure how she would know that I'd arrived. Instead, I gave a tentative knock, followed by a louder one a short while later. When that yielded no result, I resorted to following her instructions, twisting the large brass handle, opening the door, and stepping inside. Muffin tugging on the lead in anticipation of getting out of the rain. Oh, boy. I froze, one step inside the door. I really hoped this wasn't the guest suite. Partly because one frantic glance revealed no bed, wardrobe, or any other bedroom-type furniture. Mostly because the room contained half a dozen technicoloured, feathered, sequined, and seemingly otherwise naked women. The flutter of trepidation that always accompanied an initial client visit, already magnified by the strangeness of this particular project, expanded into full-blown flapping. I'd have immediately turned and fled if it hadn't been for Muffin yanking the lead out of my hand and scampering past the naked bodies to the huge curly-haired dog lumbering to its feet in one corner. Everyone stood there in stunned silence. The only sound, two dogs spinning around each other, woofling in delight. "Can we help you?" a tall, thin woman painted from head to toe with rainbows said, after what felt like an eternity of them staring at me, and me trying not to stare at them. "I'm so sorry to interrupt. I must be in the wrong place. I'll try another door." I most definitely would not try another door. Who knew what I might stumble upon behind that one? "Are you the journalist?" another person asked, folding her arms across a stomach slathered with silver glitter. "I thought you were coming next week. I don't mind you taking my photo as long as you don't print my name." "Oh, Kelly, you don't need to be ashamed of people seeing you like that. You look fab." A completely blue woman, like a naked smurf, tutted. "I know that," Kelly replied, tossing her silver bob. "But if my boss knows I've been here, it's another excuse for him to fire me, and I'm on a final warning after the Christmas party." "That's outrageous. He can't fire you for being here. It's hardly a crime. Oi, Jen, you'd better make sure this article is an accurate account. It's about time people stopped being so judgmental." "That's a good point," the tall woman added. "How can we trust that you'll not misinterpret us?" Well?" she demanded, taking a few steps closer, hands on her rainbow hips. "I'm not the journalist." "You're not? Are you sure?" "Very sure." Well, then what are you doing here, in a private, confidential group? Trying to leave? I was told to let myself into the studio. The sign pointed up here. Well, who on earth would tell you to do that, given that this is personal invitation only? Panic started rising up my throat. I did. A rich, warm voice answered through an open doorway at the back of the room. Sophie? Yes, I breathed in relief. Harriet? Hattie, to my friends. She strode into the middle of the room, carrying a large pot of paint in each hand. Her tiny frame was dressed in faded, patched-up jeans and a simple grey T-shirt. Her feet were bare, and her hair was a mass of salt and pepper curls, eyes shining the same turquoise as the paint decorating the door and signs. Despite her diminutive size, she radiated vibrant energy. I'd never seen anyone look so alive. I'm so sorry, I got my timings a little mixed up. Morag's right, this is a private group. I thought it would be over before you arrived. Everyone, please accept my sincerest apologies for inviting a stranger to intrude upon your session. I know Sophie will keep your identities confidential. If you can start finishing up, I'll show her to the main house and be right back. Who is she then? A woman covered in black feathers asked. Yeah, you've put us in a vulnerable position here, Hattie. We have the right to know who she is. Someone painted in caterpillars on one side, butterflies the other, said. Hattie glanced at me, faltering for a split second like a light bulb flickering. Sophie's a historian. A publisher asked me to write a book about Riverbend, and I thought it was a brilliant idea. But I haven't got the time or the brains for that, so they sent Sophie to help me out. So she's writing a book, not an article. Does that mean the journalist isn't coming? Oh, are we going to be in the book, Sophie? Will it have pictures? Can we have some warning before you take them so I can get my wings just right? The black-feathered woman flapped her arms like a I'm not writing the book. Hattie's eyes flashed in panic until I pressed on. It's Hattie's book. I'm merely helping her decide what to put in it. And it's going to be a history book. None of you look ready to be confined to history just yet. Too right, we're not. The chorus of jokes and giggles continued as Hattie whistled for the dogs and ushered me back outside, not breaking her stride until we'd hurried around the house, through the front door and into the kitchen. I'm so sorry. I'll explain everything. Give me half an hour to clean up and shoo them out. Oh, and if you can cook for heaters, the ingredients are in the fridge. I think Lizzie left instructions. For want of anything else to do except jangle with nervous energy, once I'd given the enormous kitchen, including a gigantic range oven, professional coffee maker and walk-in pantry, a good ogle, I found a stack of plastic containers in the fridge with a recipe stuck to the lid, and cooked a meal in a strange kitchen for a woman I'd only just met, trying not to completely freak out about what on earth I'd got myself into. I was mashing an avocado when Hattie returned. Muffin shared none of my qualms, having curled up with her new best friend on a giant dog bed in front of an old fireplace. I'm mortified. Hattie whipped open a forest green cabinet and took out 2 glasses, adding a generous slosh of gin and some tonic, before handing me one, not bothering to ask if I wanted a drink, or even whether I drank at all. It's taken over a month to get this group relaxed enough for the body session, and now I've blown their trust with one mistimed judgment. When will I learn to lock the studio door? If anyone blabs, it'll make it so much harder with the next lot. She held up her glass in my direction. If you blab, it'll be just as bad, but I'm hoping to woo you into working with me, in which case you'll need to sign a non-disclosure form. I took a large sip of my drink. Hattie broke into a grin, reminding me of the sun coming out from behind a cloud.
"How am I doing so far? Am I wooing you well?"
I gave the pan of chicken and vegetables a feeble poke.
Oh my goodness!
My host gave a startled laugh as her bright eyes widened in horror.
"Here you are, having been suddenly exposed to 6 semi-naked women decorated like toddlers let loose in a craft shop, and now you're while I stand here rambling on about my reputation. You must think I'm crackers."
No,
No.
She held up one hand.
"I'm counting on us spending a lot of time together over the next few weeks, sharing a home. I'll be trusting you with precious memories and the objects that hold them, family secrets, private information. If this is going to work, we need to be honest with each other. I don't expect you to tell me anything more than the job requires, but I do ask that what you tell me is the truth. If that's too much, then let's enjoy a lovely meal, and you can be on your way first thing in the morning."
She wrinkled her nose.
"But I liked you the moment I saw you, and I love your dog. I'm very much hoping you'll stay."
I had to admit that I liked Hattie, too. Honesty was a crucial element to my work, and I was intrigued by her and her project. Her house was idyllic, and while some might interpret being asked to cook the dinner you'd been invited to as rude, I was very short on people who treated me as one of the family. It was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore the nagging whisper that never letting anyone really get to know me outside Ezra's family, always moving on before I risked growing attached to a place or its people, maybe wasn't so perfect for me after all. I took another sip of gin, then turned to face her, forcing my shoulders straight and my chin up. I don't mind cooking. I usually live in a motorhome, so this kitchen is my idea of heaven. But while I can keep what I saw earlier to myself, I am wondering exactly what it was and whether I'm likely to stumble across anything else like it if I do stay here. Hattie's eyes glinted.
"What do you think it was?"
I'm guessing, hoping, some sort of art class? Although that wouldn't explain why it's so private and confidential.
Apart from the fact that most of those women were wearing nothing more than their underwear.
They were wearing underwear? The smallest of smiles tugged at my mouth. Well, that already makes me feel better.
Really?
Hattie peered down her pert nose at me.
They're grown women. It's only bums and boobs. All of us have them. We've spent weeks creating a safe space to be open and vulnerable, to go beyond the... I was disappointed how many of them kept their knickers on.
So, not art, then? She pulled her chin back in surprise.
You didn't think that was art?
Honestly?
I already said I'm insisting upon it.
I've had a long day, a difficult few weeks. At this point, I barely know my own name. Hattie's mouth dropped open.
Oh, my. That is why I have Lizzie. I'm a terrible host at the best of times, and it's only going to get worse. Please sit down. I'll serve up dinner, and while you eat, I'll tell you all about it and me, and why I asked you to help me. Then, if you have any more questions, you can fire away.
She shooed me towards the enormous table, grabbing plates from a rose-pink dresser and serving dishes from an orange shelf. Once we'd helped ourselves to tortilla wraps and the chicken mix, added sour cream, guacamole, and a generous sprinkling of cheese, I felt brave enough to ask another question.
Why did you tell the women that a publisher had sent me? Hattie put her wrap down. I will come to that, but it would be easier if I started at the beginning. Okay. Are you ready, or do you want to finish eating first? I'll eat, you tell me everything, I said, my echo of her earlier words producing a smile. Right. I'm Harriet Langford. I nodded. That was about the one piece of information I already knew. Otherwise known as Hattie Hood. I sat back. The artist? She nodded, unable to hide her pleasure at me knowing her name. I love your designs. Hattie Hood was well known for her forest prints used in high-quality homeware and soft furnishings, including the duvet and pillowcases in my motorhome that were covered in tiny monochrome deer. Other designs included acorns, berries, and woodpeckers. Thank you. I love them too. As well as creating the design and having input into the merchandise, I also work as an art therapist. This includes individual clients and group sessions. I work with recovering addicts, people struggling with mental illness, grief, or other traumas. The group you met today have called themselves the Changelings. I won't go into any more details, but let's just say they're all around 50 and have a tendency to... They also feel stuck, stressed out, and at times so angry they could decapitate their loved ones for breathing too loud. We're arting out the feeling like a drab old has-been, replacing it with some fierce and fabulous. Hence the caterpillars and butterflies. Zinnia's come a long way. She sighed. But you can understand why being interrupted by a stranger was unwelcome. I'm so sorry. Hattie glanced up at me sharply. No, I'm sorry. It would never have happened if... Well, let's just say I've got a lot on my mind, which is another reason I need your help. Can you tell me more about that? My services are for people who've been bereaved. I help clear houses, complete admin, bring everything to a close as painlessly as possible. Why do you want my help when no one's died? She gave a rueful smile. I'm only 55, but that's 2 years older than my mother when I lost her. I've got a big house here, crammed with history and memories. I don't want to wait until I'm doddery and decrepit before I start sorting through it. And if anything happens to me, I loathe the idea of strangers pouring their way through my possessions. I also need someone to know the story of this house, of my family. Now feels like the time to tell it. To put in a book? Goodness me, no. I tell my stories through pictures, not words. So why didn't you explain to those women that you're hiring me to help you sort through the house, get things ready in case the worst happens? Because it's none of their business. Okay. She shook her head. And because some of this story isn't pleasant or easy to remember. I don't want people sniffing about, asking questions, or spreading gossip. I don't want Harriet Langford's story intruding onto Hattie Hood and the lovely life I've created for her here. I want to sort it, then neatly pack it away once we've finished and carry on. That's why I haven't asked Lizzie or Gideon to help. They've got enough to do. You've mentioned Lizzie a few times. Is she family? Hattie smiled. I wish. Although, if she was, she might not get away with bossing me about. Lizzie is my assistant. She sorts my schedules and classes, emails and admin, as well as cleaning, shopping, and making sure I remember to eat. She relishes a long to-do list, is an all-round genius, and I'd be lost without her. She also loves to talk, especially about her famous employer, which is another reason I don't want her knowing why you're here."
"She thinks we're writing a book as well, then?"
"She does."
"And Gideon?" Her whole face lit up.
"He is family, my cousin. His mother, Agnes, was married to my uncle, Chester. Chester died a long time ago, but Agnes and Gideon live in the boathouse."
I remembered the arrow pointing to the boathouse on the sign near the entrance. "You don't think they'd want to help, or to hear the family story?"
"Potentially, but Agnes is 78 and suffers from terrible arthritis, amongst other ailments. On top of caring for his mother, Gideon runs his own business."
She stood up, taking our now empty plates and loading them into the dishwasher.
"Besides, Chester was my father's brother. Riverbend belonged to my mother's family. My father chose to be the villain in this story. Gideon won't hear that pathetic tale until he has to."
She opened the fridge and stared at the contents until I got up and pointed out the individual pavlovas that had been sitting beside the fajita containers. Once we'd refilled our glasses and were savouring the chewy meringue topped with vanilla cream and what Hattie informed me were local bilberries, she got down to business.
"So, now that you've had a chance to recover from the changelings, what do you think? Will you stay and help me? Do you need to ask more questions first, or negotiate a contract? I'm open to offers. Money isn't really an issue."
I had a dozen more questions simmering in my brain, none of them about the project or the contract. If Hattie had intended to lure me in with a mysterious story, it had worked. And the prospect of spending a few weeks in a place not drenched in sadness and loss was a powerful draw. As for Hattie, money wasn't really an issue for me either. I'd bought my motorhome outright and had a nice cushion of savings, thanks to Ezra's advice. While working with wealthier clients allowed me to help people who couldn't afford, it certainly wasn't going to make or break my decision. "I'd love to stay and am happy to accept your terms. I'll email a draft contract tomorrow for you to go over, and you can send your non-disclosure form. I've signed them before. It's not a problem."
"Oh, now that's perfect. I'm so pleased."
She looked me right in the eyes.
"I have a feeling Riverbend is just what you need."
Chapter 3. I was greeted the next morning by soft rays of late winter sunshine, peeping around the edge of Hattiehood pheasant print curtains, as if hoping to be invited in. Muffin opened one eye from her usual position, curled around my feet, but the bed was so deliciously cosy, the surroundings so restful, that I couldn't resist snuggling back down under the enormous quilt. While showing me around the house the night before, Hattie mentioned that she had therapy sessions throughout today, Friday, so I had the luxury of some time to settle in. We'd arranged to meet once she'd finished, at 5:30. After a quick peek in the living room, she'd continued the tour with a spacious office containing 2 desks, floor-to-ceiling shelves displaying a vast array of Hattiehood merchandise, and all the usual office equipment. There was a formal dining room, a sunroom with a grand piano, and a boot room, utility room, and a snug. One staircase led to the main therapy studio and a smaller space where Hattie worked on her designs. Another flight of stairs in the middle of the house ended in a hallway leading to both Hattie's bedroom and the guest suite, including a bathroom bigger than my entire motorhome. A narrower flight of stairs led from this floor up to the attic rooms, which Hattie promised to show me another time. After fetching in some essentials,
I'd spent an hour in a sunken jacuzzi bath before climbing into the four-poster bed. I'd stayed in several large houses over the years, some of them drafty or stuffy, or somehow both at the same time. Others full of sleek, shiny edges, or creaky and crumbling. One or two had been lovely, the kind of house I might dream about, if I ever dared to dream again. But Riverbend was different from all of those. It was like a hug in house form, peaceful and comforting, light and fresh, yet cosy and sumptuous. My bedroom was full of welcoming touches, a patterned bowl brimming with chocolates on one bedside table, a matching one containing dog treats, not just the basic toiletries, but a whole hamper, including face packs, skin treatments, and scented candles. Beside a kettle and coffee machine on an oak chest of drawers, a tin of homemade shortbread was tucked in with the tea, coffee pods, and luxury hot chocolate. Once I'd dragged myself out of bed, I sat in a squishy tweed armchair, wearing the fur-lined socks I'd found on the bed, a soft woolen blanket over my knees, and wept, clutching a mug of Earl Grey, as I gazed through my tears at the fields and forest beyond the sash window. Why did this haven cause me to cry for the first time in so long? Perhaps it was the bone-deep weariness from years spent trying to ease other people's suffering, or because this place had dislodged memories of the time when loneliness was an alien concept and home was taken for granted, along with yet another jolt of awareness that my current way of living was not normal or easy. I had missed being loved and cared for, with an ache that reverberated deep inside. I wondered if the warmth of this beautiful place could start to melt the sheet of ice I'd carefully constructed around my heart. That thought was terrifying and wonderful at the same time. For the first time in forever, I dared to think I might be brave enough to linger long enough to find out. I couldn't linger too long today, however, despite how much I savoured the fluffy robe, fancy tea, and moment of emotional self-indulgence. Muffin had become increasingly restless, wondering whether there was going to be any breakfast. She had now resorted to resting her head on my knee, staring up with a look that conveyed how utterly, wretchedly starving she was. I changed into jeans and a dark red jumper and headed downstairs, cringing slightly at how formal I'd looked the night before compared to Hattie's jeans. I'd left Muffin's food in the boot room, beside Flapjack's things. By the time she'd gobbled down her bowl of kibble, the house was still quiet, so we slipped through the front door and I fetched my walking boots and a grey corduroy jacket from the motorhome. "I know," I grinned at my dog, who was skipping with excitement at the thought of meeting a Sherwood Forest squirrel. "Isn't this amazing?" The air was clear and still, carrying the faintest hint of spring, and it was impossible not to feel a fizz of anticipation at the potential adventures ahead. We walked across the gravel at the front of the house, in the opposite direction to the archway we'd driven through, towards the tree line in the distance. Beyond the driveway, a footpath led across a lawn to an iron gate in another wall. A sign by the gate read that this was the kitchen garden, which didn't seem like the best place to take a dog bursting with pent-up energy, so we continued on. After a minute or so, the wall curved around, leading us past a large greenhouse and a rickety outbuilding. As soon as I rounded the curve, I had to stop at the view in front of me. With it being February, the trees were mostly bare and the undergrowth scrubby, the ground more mud than grass, but winding through the midst of it all was the river. Not great or grand, but sparkling
and burbling with joy as it carried along the rain from the night before in a wide arc that must have inspired the house's name. I let Muffin off the lead, and she raced to where the bank formed a small beach area. While she spent a glorious few minutes splashing in the shallow water lapping against the sandy dirt, ignoring the ducks quacking at her from the safety of the deeper water, I took the opportunity to soak up the surroundings and take a few deep breaths of countryside air. Once she'd got herself thoroughly sopping, I called Muffin on, and we turned to see where the river would take us. The forest lined the far bank, so we'd need a bridge or a boat to reach it. The riverside footpath led in either direction, and I assumed that one of them must end up at the boathouse that Hattie had mentioned. I'd prefer to avoid stumbling onto her aunt's property, but the bushes and trees prevented me from seeing anything beyond the river's bend. "Which way next, then?" I asked Muffin, her guess as good as mine. Better, given her powerful nose. She trotted off, and I ambled behind, watching my step as I squelched along the muddy footpath, while also trying to keep one eye on the stunning river and trees beyond. It was so peaceful here. The only interruption, the occasional bird call. The only creatures in sight, a squirrel darting up the trunk of a chestnut tree to escape Muffin, and another cluster of ducks sailing past. The questions about Hattie's project, and the more troubling ones that had surfaced during my crying session earlier, softly sank back into my mind's murky depths as my senses relished the wonderful feast of nature. As another bend emerged up ahead, I decided we should probably turn around and start heading back. However, at the same Muffin stopped her detailed investigation of a clump of reeds, stuck her nose in the air, then suddenly darted forwards, whizzing down the path to where it veered out of sight. I tried calling her back a couple of times, but once her hunting instinct locked onto something, it was almost impossible to change her mind. Praying she'd merely sniffed another squirrel or a rabbit nearby, but aware it could be something else, I followed, picking up speed until I ended up hurtling around a large rhododendron bush too fast to spot the giant puddle hidden on the other side, or to see the man sensibly skirting around the edge of it. It took 3 galumphing strides before I skidded to a stop right in the deepest part of the puddle, my arms windmilling as I fought to stay upright. Of course, 3 strides were more than enough in half a foot of water to splatter both me and the man with thick brown sludge. I sploshed around to face him, cringing in embarrassment. But before I could utter an apology, 2 dogs came racing out of the undergrowth, the smaller one jumping up at the man, covering his jeans in paw prints, the larger one launching itself at me, knocking me straight onto my backside in the freezing water. "Flapjack!" the man ordered. "Get off her!" Flapjack was about as obedient in that moment as Muffin, who, having said a thorough hello to the stranger, proceeded to join her enormous friend, now pushing his nose into my face while trying to climb onto my submerged lap. I was a micro-wobble away from tumbling flat on my back when, to my relief, the man grabbed Flapjack and somehow managed to yank him out of the puddle. A moment later, he did the same for me, only holding my hands rather than the scruff of my neck. It was as I lurched to my feet, taking a few stumbling steps onto slightly drier land, that it happened. I jerked to an abrupt stop, about 8 inches in front of him, his hand still gripping mine. He was a fair bit taller than my 5'5", but was bending slightly, presumably for balance, and as my head tipped up, our eyes met. Honestly, if he weren't holding my hands, I might have toppled back into the mud. I'd never believed in anything as fanciful as love at first sight. Lust at first sight, I knew what that felt like, and it wasn't this. The jolt that ripped through me when this person's eyes, the exact same blue and brown flecks as the February river behind us, hit mine, was far deeper than a physical reaction, mere chemicals spurting into my bloodstream. This was everything the sappy paperbacks that my sister had devoured as a teenager described. My knees turned to water. Breath stuck in my chest. My heart began pounding like a jackhammer. But my head felt clearer than it had in months, years. It was a knowing, a realization, as if I'd been waiting to look into those eyes all my life. And in that crazy, all-consuming moment, I could swear that those eyes had been waiting for me. We stood there for endless seconds, until the stranger suddenly snapped back to reality, dropping both my hands and taking a swift few steps back until he bumped against the rhododendron. "I'm so sorry. The dog... You're covered." He waved one hand at my legs. I glanced down before looking up again, but didn't need to confirm that I was, indeed, covered from the waist down in freezing cold, filthy water. It had already seeped through my jeans and, if I wasn't mistaken, soaked right on through my knickers. I took in his dark, slightly reddish hair, short at the sides but long enough on top to form thick waves. He looked a few years older than me, perhaps late 30s, and his face bore rugged features that gave the impression he'd spent his whole life up and down this river. He wasn't blandly handsome, at least in the classical sense, but the curve of his mouth and the creases framing his eyes were kind. It was a gentle face. I could have stood there staring at it for hours. "You haven't come off much better." I nodded to his own legs, almost black up to the knees, and it was his turn to glance at the splotches all over his dark green jacket and his dirt-streaked hands. "Besides, I think we started it. Muffin must have caught Flapjack's scent and gone to find him." I turned to where both dogs now sat watching us, their heads cocked in curiosity. "This is Flapjack from Riverbend, Hattie's dog." A slightly daft question, considering the likelihood of two giant curly-haired dogs having the same. He nodded. "And you must be Sophie." For a fraction of a moment, I half wondered if he knew my name by some sort of divine destiny, before rationality reasserted itself, and I realised that if he was with Flapjack, then Hattie must have told him about me. "Yes." I tried to smile, but the discomfort of an ice-cold backside meant it turned into more of a grimace. "You're the historian, come to help Hattie write a book?" he asked, sounding genuinely interested. I was managing to maintain a smidgen of composure by avoiding his eyes, but his voice was almost as bad, or should I say, as good. Deep and mellow, it was a storyteller's voice, a lullaby voice that lapped over me like a warm bath. I didn't want to lie to that voice, those eyes. I might never see this man again, but I didn't want a single word I said to him to be marred by deception. "We're going to look at Riverbend's history together, yes." Before he could reply, my phone rang. Wiping a hand on my jumper, I retrieved it from the tiny shoulder bag I used on dog walks. It was Ezra. I was tempted to let it ring, but the man smiled, nodded goodbye, and started walking away, so I figured I might as well answer, rather than leave my friend worrying. "You're still alive, then?" he asked, with a hint of grumpiness because I hadn't messaged him yet, and it was nearly midday. "Just about." "What? What does that mean?" "Hang on." I sent a quick selfie, focusing on my waist down. We met Hattie's dog Flapjack on our walk along the river. He's like an over-enthusiastic grizzly bear, and I happened to be in the middle of a puddle when he decided to say hello. I hope she was suitably apologetic. Ezra, who was understandably protective towards me, didn't see the funny side. "And we'll replace the clothes if you can't get them clean." "Oh, no, Hattie wasn't with him. It was a man." "What man?" My stomach concertinaed as I realised I didn't know who he was. That was better, though. I'd carefully curated my whole life around not developing strong feelings for anyone beyond Ezra and his family, who it was too late not to love. Seeing that man again, getting to know him, could only complicate things in the worst possible. I was happy to go on the odd date or three if I met someone I found fun and attractive, but if there was even a hint that things could end up deeper than a casual fling, I stayed well away. It was too risky. My battered heart simply couldn't take it. Anyway, the house is amazing and in the most incredible setting. It's so tranquil. Exactly what I need after 3 weeks in the Dumble war zone. "And the client, Harriet, she's okay?" I gestured to Muffin, and we started walking back towards the house, my jeans squelching with every step. She's Hattie Hood. Hattie who? The artist, who makes all those expensive designs for pottery and things. Ask Naomi, you've got a Hattie Hood teapot. She seems really nice, though, very open and friendly. I went on to describe how Hattie wanted to get her affairs and possessions in order, in case anything happened to her, that she was conscious of her mother's early death, and didn't have any family apart from an elderly aunt and her son, so preferred to use someone impartial. Reassured, Ezra made me promise for the millionth time to keep in touch. "Let me know when you find out who that man is." "Excuse me?" I could hear him laughing down the line. "And, whether he's single? I've not heard that tone in your voice for a long time." "Oh, go away, you're not my dad." "I prefer older and much cooler brother." "Fine. I'll speak to you soon then, bro." "You do that, little sis. Take care." I hurried up to the house as fast as was possible when caked in mud, and opted for the boot room entrance rather than the front door. Slipping off my walking boots, I hovered for a second, wondering if I dared remove my trousers as well, but as my hand drifted to the jean button, the door to the main hallway whipped open, revealing a young woman brandishing a stapler. "Who are you?" she barked. "And what are you doing in here?" While I took an instinctive step backwards at the sight of her fierce glare and aggressive stapler snapping, Muffin had no such qualms. The woman couldn't help but be seduced by the soggy ball of fluff bestowing her the honour of a full-body wag. Once she'd lowered her weapon and given Muffin's floppy ears a good scratch, I'd recovered my composure. "I'm Sophie. I'm staying here at the moment." "Sophie!" The woman's eyes widened in "Hattie said you'd be here at 5:30. I thought you were a deranged fan. We get them from time to time, but Hattie refuses to fix the main gates because at least then we can see them coming. She thinks that otherwise they'll sneak through the garden, which did happen once, to be fair. Gideon wants her to get a proper fence all the way round, but apparently that would block the view and stifle her creativity. At the end of the day, that's what pays our salaries, so we can't argue." "Right. I thought you'd be older, to be honest.
I was imagining that woman who does history on the telly. The one with long grey hair.
I don't have a television.
She's a lot frumpier. You're...
She paused, as if seeing me properly for the first time.
In a right state. Did you fall in the river?
Flapjack knocked me into a puddle.
She gave a loud huff, rolling her eyes. That dog! Hattie's arty-farty, be wild and free philosophy is all very well when it comes to people, but dogs need discipline. If you wait, I'll fetch a robe and we can stick your clothes straight in the wash. There'll be a towel in here somewhere for this gorgeous girl, who I'm sure is far better behaved than our wildebeest.
Are you Lizzie? I dared to ask, as she took a faded towel out of a cupboard and started rubbing Muffin's coat, my dog nuzzling closer in ecstasy.
The one and only.
Lizzie grinned up at me. To be honest, I'd assumed you'd be older too.
What, like one of those old-school busybody secretaries that keep everything running behind the scenes and know far more than their boss does?
Lizzie was anything but frumpy. Her jet-black hair was cut in a blunt bowl chop, so bad it must be ultra-fashionable. She wore a tiny leather skirt, a furry pink jumper revealing a belly-button piercing in the shape of a spider, and fishnet knee socks. I'd guess her age to be about 25. I just got the impression you'd been around forever.
I've been around since I was 14, so nearly half my life.
Her vigorous rubbing eased to a gentle pat.
I got sent here for art therapy, with the full intention of raising hell, so Hattie would be forced to give up on me, just like everyone else had. I spent weeks trying to fight her, but she refused to engage, simply turned every attack into an opportunity to art it out, as she calls it. By the end of the course, I was back in school, off drugs, and almost managing to keep up. She offered me a job, helping her with social media and stuff like that.
She shrugged.
It turns out I was awesome at organising, so the rest is history. And yes, I am like one of those secretaries. I know Hattie Hood better than she does.
Lizzie straightened up, her eyes sharpening with a look that appeared far more perceptive than her chattering implied.
Harriet Langford is a whole other matter, which is why you're here, I suppose.
She said you were too busy to help with the house project.
That's true. She could have told me about it before this morning, though. Anyway...
She shook her head, her smile returning as quickly as it had vanished.
You're shivering. I'll get you that robe.
Chapter 4. Once I was clean and dry, I joined Lizzie for giant Hattie Hood mugs of butterbean soup and crusty bread. She talked about her husband, Joss, who she lived with in Middlebeck, and their rescue hens, Cher, Celine, and Whitney. I didn't mind her stream of chatter. It avoided too many questions about me. Some of them I might be willing to answer. Most of them I definitely wouldn't. I might be living here for the next few weeks, but this was business, not a holiday or friends hanging out, and, as always, I would keep things professional. After lunch, I spent half the afternoon researching both Harriet Langford and Hattie Hood on the internet and reading the forms she emailed over. The other half was an unplanned nap, thanks to conducting the research on my ridiculously comfy bed. At 5:25, I hurried downstairs to meet Hattie in the living room. Passing the open kitchen door, I couldn't help pausing for a second when I thought I saw the man from this morning in there. I'd be lying if I said he'd not been loitering in my head. A swift second look revealed that I hadn't imagined it. He was leaning against the worktop, talking to Lizzie. Our eyes met, and it happened again. A zap of electricity that locked our gaze into place, while those blue eyes dived into the very depths of my being. Damn it! Whatever this attraction was, it had to stop. Immediately. I gave my rebellious hormones a sharp slap and hurried on to the safety of the living room.
Ah, Sophie, how was your day?
Hattie was already there, sitting on a wide sofa with a tray of drinks and cake on the table in front. Flapjack was snoozing in a patch of sunshine by the full-length window, so Muffin mooched over to join him.
Apart from my terrible dog mugging you, of course,
she added, pouring coffee from a silver pot.
He can't resist a beautiful woman, but that's no excuse in a court of law, is it?
Muffin wasn't any better. It's only because she's a third of Flapjack's size that she got away with it. I accepted the offered mug, declining milk or sugar, and took a seat on the opposite sofa. But it was lovely to meet Lizzie, and I appreciated a quiet afternoon.
Quiet only once Lizzie got back to work, I imagine.
Hattie smiled as the door opened again.
And here she is. Are the others with you?
Lizzie came to sit beside her boss, allowing the others to enter behind her. I wasn't surprised to see the man from the kitchen, or the elderly woman leaning on his arm. It hadn't struck me immediately because of the age difference, but seeing him in the kitchen had convinced me that this was Hattie's cousin, Gideon.
Gideon, Aunt Agnes, this is